This is RotoloCast.
By authority of the Commonwealth of Virginia, this event has been declared an unlawful assembly. You will leave the area immediately, or you will be arrested.
Violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, as a white nationalist rally spirals out of control.
White lives matter! White lives matter! White lives matter!
I don't know what is happening here. I don't know what just happened there.
We can now report that the Charlottesville Police and the Virginia State Police are on the scene of a 3-vehicle accident at Water and 4th Streets in downtown Charlottesville. This is just about a block off the downtown mall, the heart of the city.
For those who are unfamiliar with what's going on today in Charlottesville, there's a rally that's being held. It's supposed to happen at Emancipation Park, which used to be Robert E. Lee Park, and it's home to a statue of the Confederate General Robert E. Lee in Charlottesville. The statue was slated to be removed. Today was supposed to be a Unite the Right, quote, rally in defense of the statue.
So marching down Market Street is the National Socialist Movement, the neo-Nazis, and the Ku Klux Klan.
As counter-protesters took to the streets in Charlottesville, a speeding car slammed into them, killing a 32-year-old woman.
No doubt in anybody's mind who's there or who watches these videos that it was a planned terrorist attack.
Authorities say a 32-year-old woman was hit and killed. The driver was taken into custody.
We are currently treating this as a criminal homicide investigation.
Hours after the crash, police were still here on the scene investigating. City residents say they wish the rally was never planned in Charlottesville.
President Trump called for peace.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides.
Assuming you saw the television over the weekend, the screaming, the craziness, the lunatic hell-bent on murdering an entire crowd of people with his car. Everything about what happened in Charlottesville over the weekend was awful. Maybe the worst part was the feeling you got as you watched it, that things were completely out of control. This is what chaos looks like. One man swinging a Confederate flag like a club, his opponent trying to burn him with a homemade flamethrower. All of this happening on a city street at midday and no one trying to stop them. What country was this? Where were the authorities? What happened to the police? Is this America?
You're learning more about the victim. You're there at a memorial for Heather Heyer. What are you learning about this young woman?
We are learning more about her. We know that she's from 17 miles up the road from Ruckersville, Virginia, 32 years old. She worked in a legal law firm here in Charlottesville. She was a paralegal. She worked in the bankruptcy department. In other words, she helped people begin a new financial future.
In this issue of the day of her passing, she wanted to put down hate. And for my part, we just need to stop all this stuff and just forgive each other. I think that's what the Lord would want us to do, is to stop, just love one another.
And I think the reason that what happened to Heather has struck a chord is because we know that what she did is achievable. We don't all have to die. We don't all have to sacrifice our lives. They tried to kill my child to shut her up. Well, guess what? You just magnified her.
We begin this week with tragic news out of Charlottesville, Virginia, where a conflict between extremist fringe groups resulted in the death of a young woman named Heather Heyer. The violence erupted at a protest that included the presence of white nationalist groups, who used the event to express racial hatred and violent bigotry that has no place in this country. Those groups were met by a counter-protest, many who came out to oppose the racism on display, Others among them followed a different path, a violent opposition of the kind seen with alarming frequency across this country. Groups like Antifa, who profess to oppose fascism, but who use a broad brush of violence to attack their opposition. A distinctly fascist approach, and one that serves to escalate violence and hatred. Heather Heyer was not part of any such group. She was a patriotic American and a peaceful protester who came out that day to exercise her constitutional right to speak. Heather was there to express what is in the hearts of most Americans, that racism is unacceptable in this country. Heather Heyer was killed in a senseless attack by a violent white supremacist in what can only be described as domestic terrorism. It happened when a hate-filled man drove a car into a crowd, injuring many and claiming the life of a bright and admirable American woman. Heather Heyer represents the best of us. Her values are American values, and her death is a reminder to us all that bigotry still exists in the dark corners of our country. That we cannot overlook the forces of evil at work to undermine our nation and to overturn the progress that patriots of every color and in every time have fought and died to create. My heart breaks for Heather and for her family that lost what must be the brightest light in their sky. Perhaps the best way to honor them is to honor Heather for what she stood for. To look at her as our example as we work through this intensely difficult time, and through the pain that comes from her loss, as she attempted to lead us to a place of love that has escaped this country for so long. But in the wake of Charlottesville, that dialogue has not yet come. The nation's focus has shifted away from the difficult discussion, perhaps too painful to examine in the immediate. It has looked past the hideous acts of white supremacists and those who would disregard civil order at the peril of their fellow citizens, and instead has turned toward words of the president. Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. I'm Anthony Rotolo, and this is a RotoloCast special report, Making a Racist.
Well, thank you very much. As you know, this was a small press conference, but a very important one, and it was scheduled to talk about the great things that we're doing with the Secretary on the Veterans Administration, and we will talk about that. But we're closely following the terrible events unfolding in Charlottesville, Virginia. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides. It's been going on for a long time in our country. Not Donald Trump, not Barack Obama. It's been going on for a long, long time. It has no place in America. What is vital now is a swift restoration of law and order and the protection of innocent lives. No citizen should ever fear for their safety and security in our society, and no child should ever be afraid to go outside and play or be with their parents and have a good time.
This speech today was shameful.
And as a mother, to hear the president of these United States not sit here and condemn what has happened, as a black woman of two black boys, my heart bleeds.
What Trump did today was a moral disgrace.
Here is the bottom line. This was not many sides, because he does not want to antagonize anybody in his base, let us be clear, does not have the spine, does not have the courage, does not have the leadership to call this out by name. And that is shameful. No, Ben.
As I said on Saturday, we condemn in the strongest possible terms
this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence, it has no place in America. We must love each other, show affection for each other, and unite together in condemnation of hatred, bigotry, and violence.
Last night I couldn't sleep at all because President Trump, our president, has literally betrayed the conscience of our country, the very moral fabric in which we've made progress when it comes to race relations in America. He's failed us.
Racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including the KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans.
And it's very unfortunate that our president would say things like he did in that press conference yesterday when he says, well, there's, good people on the side of the Nazis.
Why did you wait so long last week?
I didn't wait long. I didn't wait long. I didn't wait long. I wanted to make sure, unlike most politicians, that what I said was correct. Now, here's the thing, excuse me, take it nice and easy. And honestly, if the press were not fake, and if it was honest, the press would have said what I said was very nice. How about a couple of
terrorism that event? Was there terrorism? He said that the alt-right is behind these attacks, and he linked that same group to those who perpetrated the attack in Charlottesville.
Well, I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm sure Senator McCain must know what he's talking about. But when you say the alt-right, define alt-right to me. You define it. Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying,
define it for me. Come on, let's go.
Senator McCain defined them as the same group.
Okay, what about the alt-left that came charging at, excuse me, what about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
This is Senator McCain's statement.
Let me ask you this. What about the fact that they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. So, as far as I'm concerned, that was a horrible, horrible day. Wait a minute. I'm not finished. Fake news.
Equating white supremacists on one side with the other side that he calls the alt-left. We don't talk about this much. 2/3 of white men voted for Trump. 53% of white women, the majority, voted for Trump. He was elected by white Americans. If you vote for a racist, what are you then? If you hold down the woman while the rapist is raping her, and you didn't rape her, are you a rapist?
That's a very powerful and uncomfortable anecdote that you share, and people will think that you're comparing Trump voters to racists.
Yeah, and it's uncomfortable, isn't it?
That is uncomfortable.
The charge of racism is a serious accusation, but one made regularly against politicians and voters, particularly of the Republican Party. It has been a popular attack used by Democrats to disarm and shut down Republicans for many, many years. Presidents Nixon, Reagan, Bush, and now Trump have all been accused of bigotry for their policies in economics, social welfare, drug laws, foreign policy, and countless other areas. Most Republicans have chosen to shrink from those charges, and in the process, cede the moral high ground to the Democrats, who claim the mantle of racial justice. But with Trump, this old tactic takes on a new intensity. Since his campaign for the presidency began, a constant drumbeat has been heard from the left and echoed in the mainstream media. A repeated narrative that Donald Trump is not just a Republican who supports racist policies, but that he, himself, is secretly an avowed racist, a supporter of white supremacists, a Nazi in the mold of Adolf Hitler, and that his election is a national emergency. But is this accusation justified? Is President Trump, the man, a racist? And do the Democrats really hold the moral high ground when it comes to racial equality in this country? To understand this complex and painful issue, we must begin by examining the history of racial politics in America and the role played by Republicans and Democrats in leading us to this moment.
So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
If you ask the average American which party stands for racial equality, many Americans may imagine the legacies of Democratic presidents like Kennedy and Johnson, who pursued civil rights bills in the 1960s, and of course the election of Democrat Barack Obama, the nation's first African-American president. These are, of course, admirable achievements, but the Democrats' history on race has not always been so pure. In truth, until very recently, the Democratic Party had its roots in movements against equality. In the time before the Civil War, the Democratic Party was dominant throughout the South, and its members supported slavery as a pillar of the party platform.
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood.
In one of the nation's most shameful moments, the Supreme Court decision known as the Dred Scott case, it was declared that a slave, whether free or not, could not be considered an American citizen, and that black people had no standing in American courts. It's a scar on history, and a great embarrassment to all who look back on such a cruel decision. That ruling that failed to provide the most basic form of freedom to African Americans was decided by a 7-2 vote, all 7 in favor of excluding African Americans from even the most basic form of freedom. Those votes came from Democrats. The 2 dissenting votes, they came from Republicans.
I have a dream that one day, even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice.
The Republican Party was founded as an anti-slavery party. Its main issue, to stop the spread of slavery into new territories and states, and to work toward abolition of the practice wherever else it existed. This came to a head with the election of our first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln's intention to eliminate slavery literally split the country, leading to the secession of South Carolina, then other states, and the formation of the Confederacy, made up of predominantly Democrats. Fortunately for us all, the Confederacy lost, and Lincoln's Republican Party won. President Lincoln and the Union Army crushed tens of thousands of Confederate traitors. And when the fighting stopped, the president set out to reassemble the nation with tough terms for those who would have seen it torn apart. Lincoln intended to force Confederate citizens to swear allegiance to the United States, the new United States, in which slavery did not exist. He planned to punish the elected representatives who had gone along with the Confederate rebellion, again, mainly Democrats, and Lincoln saw no cause to cede any ground on the abolition of slavery. For the emancipated slaves, Lincoln looked toward a policy of assimilation, one that would allow for Black Americans to gain equal rights, including the right to vote and hold elected office. But on the night of April 14th, 1865, while attending a theater performance of a play called Our American Cousin, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by a Confederate sympathizer, an actor named John Wilkes Booth, a Democrat. And with the untimely death of our greatest president, Lincoln's vice president assumed the office. Johnson was no Lincoln. Johnson was a Democrat.
I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
Johnson believed, as many Southerners did at the time, that black people were inferior to white people. He believed that freed slaves were not capable of managing their own lives. He did not believe that blacks should be given the right to vote. History records that President Johnson advised a group of visitors to the White House, black Americans, that they should emigrate to another country to find freedom. Johnson's party, the Democrats, agreed. That party opposed nearly unanimously any legislation that would grant rights to the freed slaves, including the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, the 14th Amendment granting citizenship to African Americans, and the 15th Amendment granting black Americans the right to vote. Republicans favored these amendments, and each passed as a result of solid Republican support. But Andrew Johnson and the Democrats persisted in their efforts to block or stall progress toward inclusion and equality. Johnson abandoned Lincoln's plans for Reconstruction, allowing nearly all Confederate leaders to regain their power and property without paying a price for their betrayal or their bigotry. As Republicans elected the nation's first African American members of Congress, the Democrats worked to install a system of black codes throughout the South, imposing poll tests and discriminatory rules that kept blacks from voting, owning homes, or opening businesses.
I have a dream that one day, down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today.
To enforce these illegal codes, the Democrats turned to terrorism, founding the violent Ku Klux Klan, used to intimidate, abuse, and murder black Americans and anyone who would stand to defend them. The Klan, which remains an active terrorist group to this day, was founded by Nathan Bedford Forrest, a prominent Democrat. Support for the Klan and its vile beliefs was not limited to the fringes of society as it seems today. The KKK was a mainstream organization in the Democratic Party.
I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low, the rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight, and the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together.
President Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat with a PhD and former president of Princeton University, was quite sympathetic to the views of the Klan. Wilson reinstated segregation in federal agencies, meaning black and white Americans would be separated throughout the government. Wilson also hosted the first movie screening ever held at the White House. The feature presentation was a racist film called Birth of a Nation, which was then known by its original title, The Klansman. The Democratic Party remained closed to African Americans for years to come. Franklin D. Roosevelt, perhaps the greatest of modern Democratic presidents, failed to pursue a single policy to advance the cause of equality. His wife Eleanor famously took up the cause where her husband would not. FDR believed the issue of race was too sensitive and too complex to address in the midst of the Great Depression and the Second World War.
This is our hope. This is a faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
Democrat Harry Truman would take the admirable step of desegregating the U.S. military, though Democrats continued to resist the same policies in civilian life throughout the country. When the Supreme Court ruled that public schools would be desegregated in its famous Brown versus Board of Education case, it was the Democrats that resisted the change. George Wallace, a Democratic presidential candidate and avowed segregationist, attempted to physically block black students from attending schools in Alabama. Desegregation came only with the help and protection of federal troops.
This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee. Sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true."
By 1960, the outcry for civil rights was growing louder, and neither the Democrats nor the Republicans could escape the call of history. Republican Richard Nixon, the vice president, soon to be seeking his own run for the White House, reached out to civil rights leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., forming a personal friendship with King. Democrat John F. Kennedy still remained uninterested in the cause of equality. In the midst of his work toward civil rights, King expressed his feelings to Nixon, writing, "I will long remember the rich fellowship which we shared together and the fruitful discussion that we had. How deeply grateful all people of goodwill are to you for your assiduous labor and dauntless courage in seeking to make the Civil Rights Bill a reality. This is certainly an expression of your devotion to the highest mandates of the moral law." And Nixon responds, "I am sure you know how much I appreciate your generous comments. My only regret is that I have been unable to do more than I have. Progress is understandably slow in this field, but we at least can be sure that we are moving steadily and surely ahead." For Kennedy's part, his motivations were political, as the rising star of the Democratic Party would adopt the cause of civil rights only after pressure from Eleanor Roosevelt herself. Still the moral conscience of her party, Eleanor refused to endorse or campaign for Kennedy unless he added civil rights to his platform.
So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghanies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California.
But with the assassination of President Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson assumed the presidency in 1963. Johnson was a Democrat from Texas and a powerful leader in the Senate. He was also a noted racist. Johnson saw an opportunity in civil rights. As the calls for equality grew louder in the country, famously Johnson declared that passing the civil rights and voting rights bills would splinter the Democratic Party, which he believed would lose the votes of the South for a generation. But if he had to do it, Johnson had a plan. He is reported to have said, "I'll have these niggers voting Democrat for 200 years."
But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside.
Though his own Democratic Party opposed the bills in the greatest numbers, Johnson got them through Congress and signed them into law. And he was right. The South, the majority of the Democratic base, was indeed lost. But its legacy remains. It is true that many voters with racist views abandoned the Democrats in the years after. But the Democrats did not abandon those in their midst who maintained power and leadership in the party. Very powerful senators who opposed civil rights continued to be top voices in the party, and they guided the next generation of Democrats toward leadership positions. Senators like J. William Fulbright, who supported segregation, is honored among Democrats to this day, and was most notably a mentor to President Bill Clinton. Al Gore Sr., another racist Democrat senator, is of course the father of today's Democrat celebrity, former Vice President Al Gore of Tennessee. And one of the most celebrated leaders of the Democratic Party, Robert Byrd. He was also leader of the KKK. Robert Byrd served as a Democrat senator until his death in 2010. He was memorialized by former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who claimed him as a mentor and a friend.
Let freedom ring, and when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
For their part, the Republican Party has not had a perfect record on race. Indeed, when the Democrats lost support of the South, Republicans gained those votes in good number, and the party's roots in opposition of slavery and racism were at times overlooked in favor of the need for a voting majority. But as this shift occurred, Democrats pulled off a strategy of political judo. They attempted to shift the blame for racial inequality to their opponents, the Republican Party.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. And unfortunately, there are people like that. And he has lifted them up.
Republicans have failed for decades to defend against the charges of racism from the Democratic Party. Though many believe that the heart of the Democrats' policies on race, underpinned by social welfare programs and affirmative action, have kept a generation of Americans of all colors in poverty and dependent on the Democrats for future benefits. Republicans believe that the Democrats' pursuit of socialism in this form have only sowed further division deeper into the fabric of this country. But what about President Trump? How has this president become so widely labeled as a racist, where previous Republicans have escaped such unanimous condemnation? This view of Trump is the result of a focused effort by his opponents that continues the branding of Republicans as racist, but is aided by the unusual persona of Trump himself. From the moment of his announcement, Donald Trump shirked the political correctness much of the country had gotten used to in recent decades. The approved appropriate language for addressing race, gender, and other identity issues, which was largely advanced by the Democratic Party as a means of controlling the debate on these topics.
Now look, I can be the most politically correct person that you've ever interviewed. It takes too much time.
Isn't there a cost? People call, I think all the names they call you because of the things you say.
People don't want political correctness. They're tired of it today. And I think that's one of the things that has resonated with me. I don't go out of my way to be politically incorrect.
But Trump's style is not just blunt or offensive at times. It's also combative.
That's an offensive term. People find that. You mean it's not politically correct and yet everybody uses it? So you know what? Give me a different term. Give me a different term. What else would you like to say? Or you want me to say that? Okay, no, I'll use the word anchor baby. Excuse me. I'll use the word anchor baby.
Throughout his election campaign and since, President Trump has done verbal battle with opponents of every kind. Women and men, black, white, and all others. Donald Trump is an equal opportunity offender.
Somebody said to me the other day, but Mr. Trump, you're not a nice person. We have losers. We have losers. We have people that don't have it. We have people that are morally corrupt. We have people that are selling this country down the drain. We had an African-American guy who was a fan of mine. Great guy. He happens to be African-American. He calls himself black. He said, I'm black. I said, I can't say that. It's not politically correct. You know what? Look at my African-American over here. Look at him. Are you the greatest? Ask a question, please.
My question is,
Did the government of Mexico ask you to come up here and make this?
Of course.
Okay, go ahead, ask your question.
Call women you don't like fat pigs, dogs, slobs, and disgusting animals. Your Twitter account...
Only Rosie O'Donnell. Am I allowed to finish?
Go ahead, Mr. Trump.
I know you're trying to build up your energy, Jeff, but it's not working
one at a time.
Yeah.
One of the worst Secretary of States in the history of the country. She talks about me being dangerous. She's killed hundreds of thousands of people with her stupidity.
We have a terrible president who happens to be African American. There has never been a greater division, just about, than what we have right now. The hatred, the animosity. The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems.
This is a tough business to run for president.
I know, you're a tough guy, Jeb. She said he's a pussy. That's terrible. Terrible. Marco is not a negotiator. I watched him melt down, and I'll tell you, it was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
You keep saying that Hispanics love you.
True.
And yes, you won the Hispanic vote in Nevada.
True.
But wouldn't that make you an unelectable candidate in a general election?
First of all, I don't believe anything Telemundo says.
You used to say that you love.
Number one.
If you become president, will a woman make the same as a man?
You're going to make the same if you do as good a job. You know, by the way, I don't like this mic. Whoever the hell bought this mic system, don't be the son of a bitch to put it in, I'll tell you. These people. Calderon said, Mexico will not pay for the wall. Could we have your comment? I said, yes. The wall just got 10 feet higher. And by the way, they're coming from all over the world, including the Middle East. Why not? Come in. Come on in. We're stupid. We'll take care of you. We'll pay. Get out of here. Get out. Out. Pocahontas. That's this Elizabeth Warren. I call her Goofy. Pocahontas. Well, no, she's... Look, she is
very offensive.
You're telling me? Oh, really? Oh, I'm sorry about that. Pocahontas. Hillary Clinton is a crook.
That's negative.
I call her Crooked Hillary. She's Crooked Hillary.
Jeb Bush is a low energy person. Little Marco.
Lying Ted. He's a liar. Ooh. Bible high, puts it down, and then he lies.
You know, he was begging for my endorsement. I could have said, Mitt, drop to your knees. He would have dropped to his knees.
Do you regret calling her Pocahontas? Do you regret that?
I do regret calling her Pocahontas because I think it's a tremendous insult to Pocahontas.
Right.
So to Pocahontas, I would like to apologize to you.
But what of Trump's own history on race? Until entering the political arena, Donald Trump was not known as a racist. In fact, he was often known and recognized for his progressive views on race and gender. In 1986, after emerging on the scene as a real estate mogul, Trump was honored with the Ellis Island Award, recognized alongside Rosa Parks and other civil rights leaders. He was also known for hiring employees of diverse backgrounds in his Trump organization, including minority executives and women leaders, at a time when both groups were nearly absent from the top levels of American industry. After purchasing his Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach, Florida, Trump did battle with the racist and anti-Semitic policies of that community, opening his resort to Jewish and minority guests over the objections of the residents. Trump's daughter, Ivanka, married a Jewish man, Jared Kushner, in 2009. Both are among Trump's closest family members and advisors. His beloved grandchildren are Jewish as well. And by the time Trump entered the world of reality television with his hit series The Apprentice, there were no charges of racism against him in the media. Indeed, women and men of all backgrounds competed and succeeded on that program, including Omarosa Manigault, who competed on the first season of The Apprentice and still serves as an advisor and aide to President Trump today. As Trump looked ahead at an eventual presidential run of his own, he took up the strange issue of President Obama's birth certificate, becoming the most prominent birther in the country. That issue, which was first raised by the Hillary Clinton campaign during the 2008 Democratic primaries, had been disproven by the start of the Obama administration. But Donald Trump, as he often does, carried on about it for a while longer.
Every person that interviews you goes right for the birth certificate issue, which, by the way, you did win.
I did. He released it.
They finally...
Whatever it was he released. You know, some people don't know what it was that he released, and I'm not sure what he released, but... There's one line called place of birth. I'd like to see what he said. A lot of people want me to talk about place of birth. You saw this audience. Probably the biggest hand I got was when I mentioned place of birth.
Many people do not think it was authentic. His mother was not in the hospital. There were many other things that came out.
In defense of the president, Democrats framed the issue as racist.
Please, when you think about Trump, please do not forget that this was a guy who was one of the leaders in this so-called birther effort. You remember that? And that was an intentional effort to try to delegitimize the President of the United States because he was black.
There is no indication that Trump's motivations were racial. It is more likely his aim was to make political waves and capture some news coverage before running himself in 2012 or 2016. But the charge of racism lingered, and by the 2016 campaign, Democrats' initial attempts to paint Trump as a racist laid the groundwork for further attacks, now more effective as an eager media aligned with the entrenched power brokers in both parties to defeat him.
I think many people are expecting to hear Donald Trump sort of clarify with more adept language, but essentially he keeps doubling down.
I'm outraged. I can't understand how is it possible that a presidential candidate can speak and use hate language.
Somebody's doing the raping, Don. I mean, you know, somebody's doing the, you're saying it's women being raped. Well, who's doing the raping?
Paul Ryan said it was racist for Donald Trump to claim that a Mexican-American judge couldn't be fair in the fraud case against Trump University. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said it was just plain stupid. Trump had said that the judge was biased because of Trump's immigration policies.
I want to ask you about comments you made about the judge in the Trump University case. You said that you thought it was a conflict of interest that he was the judge because he's of Mexican heritage, even though he's from Indiana. Yeah. Hillary Clinton said that that is a racist attack on a federal judge.
Oh, you know, she's so wonderful, you know. I mean, here's a woman that should be put in jail for what she did with her emails, and she's commenting on this. Let me just tell you, it's very simple. This judge is of Mexican heritage. I'm building a wall.
Trump's signature issue, border security and ending illegal immigration, faced a wave of condemnation from Democrats and media personalities, all focused on his description of the problem. When the disgraced leader of the KKK, David Duke, endorsed Trump in a publicity stunt, attempting to attract media coverage for himself, Democrats pounced on Trump, claiming he had not denounced Duke or the KKK, and implying Trump held secret sympathy for white supremacist views. Though Trump denounced the Klan and Duke repeatedly during the 2016 campaign, it was hardly necessary for him to do so. Donald Trump had already condemned David Duke years earlier, in 2000, when he declined to run for president on the Reform Party ticket, because David Duke had become a member of the party.
I've made my decision. I'm not going to be running. The party is, as you know, self-destructing.
Nothing could change your mind with that?
No, totally not.
When you say the party is self-destructing, what do you see as the biggest problem with the Reform Party right now?
Well, you've got David Duke just joined, a bigot, a racist, a problem. I mean, this is not exactly the people you want in your party.
Another layer in this attempt to make Donald Trump into a racist came after his election, when Steve Bannon was appointed to a position of senior counselor to the president. As the former head of Breitbart News, Bannon has been branded by the left as a white supremacist and supporter of neo-Nazi groups for many years, a view that has stuck, whether deserved or not. Bannon resigned from the Trump administration in the wake of the Charlottesville backlash, having stated quite clearly only last week that he views neo-Nazis as clowns that need to be crushed. But beyond the dismissal of Steve Bannon or his denouncements of David Duke, President Trump himself has adopted a number of policies that would suggest his own views are far from racist. Trump, like many conservative Republicans, supports policies designed to strengthen the American family, charging that the Democrats' support for widespread welfare programs have decimated the American family, trapping millions into poverty and disrupting the family unit that is essential for the success of future generations. President Trump also supports school choice. He is the first president to pursue these policies in a significant way, which are supported widely within the African American community and are seen as a way for minority students to finally escape failing schools. And in his campaign for president, Trump did what few modern Republicans have ever dared to do. He reached out directly to the African American community, asking for support and offering a new deal for Black Americans.
Tonight, I'm asking for the vote of every single African American citizen in this country who wants to see a better future. Look how much African American communities have suffered under Democratic control. To those I say the following: what do you have to lose by trying something new like Trump? What do you have to lose?
But once again, Trump's words were the focus of Democrats, who branded them racist and ignorant. But the message was not lost on voters. In 2016, Trump won a greater share of the Black and Latino vote than Mitt Romney 4 years before. And his popularity among those groups is trending higher than thought possible for a Republican president. And this reveals the motivation at play in the ongoing effort to make President Trump a racist. Democrats who have worked for decades to bury their own party's responsibility for racial inequality and their complicity in systemic racism see a threat in Donald Trump. As with most issues, Trump's refusal to follow the rules of political correctness puts his opponents in a difficult position. His willingness to have the fight, to punch back when Democrats paint his policies as racist, sexist, or anything else, is a departure from other Republicans who would shrink in the face of such charges. The result is an argument the Democrats know they can't win. When asked for evidence of their own superiority on race and equality, the moral high ground they've taken quickly erodes when the discussion becomes about results. For the Democrats, resisting Trump is thermonuclear war, not because he represents some sort of racist, sexist, Islamophobic fascism, as they claim, but because he's the founder of a new, unvarnished form of politics focused on action and outcomes, rather than division and fear. His opponents will do whatever it takes to stop him. They must, because his success means their certain failure. They tried with the Russia story, and they failed.
I don't think when the truth comes out that even the right-wing conservatives who are defending Trump at this point are going to be able to stand with him. When we unveil this collusion that I believe is there, that's where impeachment comes in.
Still without any proof of wrongdoing or any connection between the president and Russia. They tried again with North Korea, claiming that President Trump would bring the world to the brink of nuclear destruction.
This is the first time that the dangerous apocalyptic statements of the North Korean regime have been met by dangerous apocalyptic statements by the President of the United States.
We have never heard this kind of bluster from an American president to another world leader.
President Trump sounds more like a North Korean leader, unfortunately, than an American leader.
his approach has already caused the North Korean dictator to back down. And now, all that's left is the most dangerous and toxic weapon in the Democrats' arsenal: race. It's their last-ditch attempt, their desperate Hail Mary, to inflame the pain and fear of the American people, to play to the darkest, most destructive emotions in us all, in an attempt to divide us and conquer Trump at all costs.
If you vote for a racist, what are you then? If you hold down the woman while the rapist is raping her, and you didn't rape her, are you a rapist?
That's a very powerful and uncomfortable anecdote that you share. And people will think that you're comparing Trump voters to racists.
Yeah, and it's uncomfortable, isn't it?
That is uncomfortable.
To win this fight, the Democrats are making a racist. But a lie can only survive in darkness. In the end, the American people will be the judge of Donald Trump's character. And it's likely that President Trump's true feelings about race and this country will be revealed through his actions, not his words.